tell us a little bit about your areas of expertise as they relate to the Women War and Peace series?
Okay, so when I was in graduate school, a lot of my work was on refugees, forced migrants, and then since I've left graduate school, it's on now on state failure, on terrorism, political violence, and I've extended that into how women find themselves being perpetrators of terrorism and being involved in terrorist movements and conflicts. So, but at the same time, also how sexual violence is used to almost to recruit women into terrorist organizations. So that's what I do now.
Let's start off by talking about what is the biggest challenge facing women that are living in conflict zones?
Okay, so conflict in of itself means that there's a lack of security and order in a country. So it's very devastating for any type of country. But at the same time, women and children are disproportionately the victims of conflict, and 70% of the casualties of war are non-combatants, and the majority of those are women and children. So women and children find themselves in very vulnerable situations, and that happens two types of ways. First of all, because of women being in the position that they are in, they experience sexual violence where rape is used as a tool of war, as we've seen in very recent conflicts, but also as a consequence of forced migration and a consequence of the lack of order and security. You see women who are forced into prostitution, who end up being victims of sexual trafficking, and also end up exchanging sex for aid. So it becomes a very this complicated dynamic that emerge in conflict for women who find themselves in these vulnerable situations.
Which regions or countries do you believe should be the greatest concern to the global community with regards to women and human rights issues?
Okay, so a staggering number that is reported by the International Rescue Committee says that 1 in 3 women will be coerced into sex or abused in her lifetime worldwide. So it's obvious that this is a global humanitarian concern. And so it's not that violence against women and abuse against women is not just unique to a particular region or a particular country. At the same time, there are extreme examples, and like I said, in recent years, Democratic Republic of Congo and Afghanistan have they've witnessed tremendous human rights abuses against women in the form of sexual violence, and particularly Democratic Republic of Congo, where you see approximately 50 women are raped every hour. That's a staggering figure. That's about 1,200 women per day. So there are definitely humanitarian concerns regarding that country. It's also in Afghanistan and in any type of patriarchal society where the men are typically in power and women are in these lesser types of roles and positions. Women do not feel at liberty to go and report rape. And in several cases where Sharia law is in place, they also feel that they could report rape and then they have to go through humiliating procedures in order to prove it, and could also be turned back on them in the sense that they will be accused of adultery and could be sentenced to stoning and other types of being sentenced to death. So these are particular 2 countries that have witnessed tremendous human rights abuses, but also post-conflict nations such as Bosnia-Herzegovina, Rwanda, as well as Southern Sudan that now has succeeded. They're still going through a period of time where women are still suffering from mental health issues, lack of economic productivity, because sexual violence, just the act itself has lasting implications for that country and for the women, because women typically are the social fabric of countries. So by destroying women, where a quote was that war is now taking place upon women's bodies, it really compromises the foundation of that country, because women are the child bearers. They are the structure and the foundation of homes.
Do you believe the international community has done enough to address the vulnerability of women in conflict areas?
Okay, so starting with the UN as the international governing body, they have implemented a series of UN Security Council resolutions dating back to 2000, where they acknowledge that rape is a tool of war used against women, to as recent as 2010, where it addresses the impunity of the perpetrators of violence. And in 2008, they also had another resolution, I believe it was 1820, that makes the sexual violence and highlights it, and that as brings awareness to the fact that sexual violence is a rampant problem in conflict zones. So the international community in the form of the UN have implemented these resolutions. The only problem is that there's no enforcing body. So you can implement resolutions and not have any type of mechanism to enforce it on the ground, which is what we have seen. So the international criminal courts have been more successful in many ways in bringing perpetrators of sexual violence to justice, and we've seen that with the international criminal tribunal courts of former Yugoslavia, of Rwanda and Sudan, where they have actually brought perpetrators of violence to justice and and convicted them. But there's only been 12 as of now in the International Criminal Court and several in the International Criminal Tribunal courts. So there's obviously that there's still some work to be done, but at the same time, I believe the court system the international court system has taken great strides to raise awareness of this issue and to really bring people to punishment for the crimes of war, the war crimes against women that have taken place in conflict.
In general, what is the role that women play in the peace-building process?
I feel that because women are disproportionately the victims of war, that they're very vested in seeing conflict come to an end because of the ways in which they are abused and vulnerable during these situations. So women have been very active in peace-building processes. Particularly in Liberia, the Women's Peace Initiative emerged out of Liberia to bring an end to the more than 15-year civil war. And what they did is that they sat in the marketplace and began to pray. And it started out with just a few women and gradually grew to thousands of women, became the Women's Peace Initiative, and then extended into Guinea, into Sierra Leone, and brought Nigeria into the negotiating process to help mediate this conflict and bring it into conflict in Liberia, but also in Sierra Leone, and the conflict that was taking place between Guinea and Liberia. So women have been very instrumental in being involved in the peace process because of their vested interests. At the same time, what happens is that when they sit down to the negotiating table to actually bargain with an agreement, women are often absent from these discussions. And so a lot of the unique natures and the unique issues that women suffer or women face in conflict are marginalized. Women do not find that their issues are put on the table, and they find themselves absent from the government that is forming and the transitional government that's forming. Liberia has been a really unique case that we've seen after Charles Taylor was removed from power. We had Amos Sawyer come into power and as an interim president, and then now we have the first female president ever in Africa, Ellen Sirleaf. So Liberia has been very ahead of its time as far as women being involved, but that's just a unique example. Women still remain absent from the negotiating process, and really less than 1% of peace negotiators from the UN are women.
Despite the efforts and attempts of the international community, what are some of the ongoing challenges? What's going to be the future challenges for facing women in emerging conflict zones?
Okay, so as long as conflict exists, women will find themselves in vulnerable positions, and as long as there are not UN peacekeepers who are sensitive to women's issues, women will not have their voice heard. So the first thing, of course, would be, and this may sound idealistic, but to begin to think of preventative measures to prevent conflict. And in an absence of those preventative measures, we have to come up with post-conflict or ongoing conflict measures to address women's needs and to protect them. So we've seen in camps in Rwanda and in Sudan where we've had UN officials address the needs of women by providing them with food aid, but at the same time, what they ended up finding themselves in a situation where they would have to use sex to barter for aid, or they would, when aid was given to women directly, they would be beaten and raped, and it would be stolen from them. So even though you're in a refugee camp, you're supposed to be safe, and there are people there that are addressing your needs, there's still these dynamics that are still in place that just come with conflict. You cannot monitor a refugee camp 24 hours a day, just as you cannot monitor and secure borders and in conflict zones. There's just this lack of order and security. So as long as you have conflict, you will always have a position where women are in these vulnerable states. So the first thing is to really address preventative measures of conflict, and once conflict takes place, to pay attention to the dynamics of the society. I think that's what a lot of times happens with the international community, that we're not really aware of the cultural dynamics of society, and that's where we have made missteps in the past. And so we're trying to take a more bottom-up approach. We're working with, like I said, in Liberia, on-the-ground initiatives to address women's issues and bringing them to the table, but bringing them also highlighting their issues.
How can the international community better address this crisis of violence against women in conflict zones?
Okay. I believe that the first step is acknowledgement that there is a problem that exists, and acknowledging that rape is used as a tool of ethnic cleansing, that rape is used as a tool of genocide, and that it exists. And then bringing awareness to this issue, and not like pushing it under the rug or pushing it under the table is something that not to be addressed, because a lot of times in conflicts, when we think about Darfur, we think about Rwanda, we think about the genocide, we think about these tremendous heinous humanitarian abuses, but we forget about the people that the survivors that still have scars on their bodies, and that are many times are women. So that is the first thing that the international community can do, is first acknowledge it, bring awareness to it, and then work to really reduce this culture of impunity, address this culture of impunity that happens, where men feel in these situations, feel at liberty to commit these acts, because there's no recourse for them. There's no recourse in these patriarchal societies, and there's no recourse in post-conflict zones. Through the international criminal court system is the first step, but also providing money and aid and support and awareness to these issues is important, because after conflict has ended, we forget about it in the international. We don't talk about Rwanda that much anymore. And we talk about Sudan just because they succeeded and created in another state. But there are still mental health issues that continue for many decades for women, that lead to a loss of economic productivity. Also, the orphans, the children born out of rape, are often abandoned by women because if they do keep these children, they're ostracized from society. So there needs to be support for these women. And then they have to also address HIV and AIDS, which that you've seen a surge or increase in that takes place in conflict zones as a result of rape. So after conflict is ended, just because we're rebuilding society, we need to rebuild the social fabric of society, and that starts with women and children.
I'm going to be interviewing, as part of this, because the series focuses quite a bit on female refugees that have now come to the United States. What would be your definition? So if someone said, what is a refugee? What is a refugee?
Refugee is someone that has left their country of origin to seek asylum in a host country, another country outside of their borders. That is, the thing about refugees is that a small number of refugees are resettled in third world countries because of the cultural differences and cultural issues that exist between. We've had in the past with the Hmong, where we tried to resettle them in Merced, California, and other places where there has been tremendous cultural clashes. So that doesn't happen as much. But we also have a large IDP population, and that's simply the move. People forget about those individuals who move around within their country, may not have the resources to leave into another border. But there are many dynamics. We have people who leave the country and go to what we call third country resettlement, that it doesn't share a border, and that's one feature of that. That's one of the that's probably the safest channel for individuals post-conflict. But we also have IDPs who remain in these countries, like Colombia, where you have one of the largest IDP populations, and it also has tremendous problems in that country as well. But in also many sub-Saharan African countries, you have the movement of people across borders, and so they're still at risk of conflict. So the safest channel or the safest pathway would be third country resettlement, but that doesn't happen. But at the same time, once you make it to another country, maybe in the UK or the European Union or the United States, you have a lot more support from the UNHCR and from those host nations. And then they begin to address the issue of language training, of providing them with skills that they can now rebuild their lives in another country.